The crowd gasped when she collapsed on stage. Not a single person in that banquet hall realized I was the ghost that made her faint. Her lips had been moving confidently just seconds before, spewing the same rehearsed speech about her beloved husband who couldn't bear the burden of war. Then our eyes met across the room. I stood there in my dress uniform, medals gleaming under the chandelier lights, very much alive. 5 years of her lies crushed in a single moment. The perfect, grieving widow Ava Harrington, America's sweetheart advocate for traumatized veterans, suddenly sprawled on the stage floor, white as a sheet, as if she'd seen a ghost. Well, she had. Me. Nobody runs from special forces, especially not my own wife. But let me back up. You need to understand how I ended up watching my own funeral from behind a tree 5 years ago. We met at Walter Reed. I was recovering from my 3rd deployment to Afghanistan, the one that got me a Purple Heart and a permanent limp. Took a bullet pulling my team out of an ambush near Kandahar. The therapist said writing this stuff down might help with the nightmares. So here it is. I don't like talking about it much. But Ava, she loved hearing about it. Too much, I realize now. She was volunteering, reading to the guys who couldn't leave their beds. Long brown hair, always in that messy bun. Green eyes that made you want to spill your guts. A smile that felt like coming home. I thought it was fate when she sat next to my bed. Now I know she specifically requested the heroes section, her words, not mine. She was hunting for stories even then. You must have seen some terrible things, she said on her 3rd visit, leaning forward like I was about to tell her the meaning of life. Nothing I can't handle. Standard reply, the kind that makes civilians feel better. She didn't buy it. It's okay not to be okay, David. That's what I'm trying to help people understand about our veterans. I married her 6 months later. The guys from my unit thought I was rushing, but when you've seen how fast life can end, you don't waste time. We bought a little house outside of Fort Benning. I took a training position. No more deployments. For 2 years, things were good. Or I thought they were. The nightmares were bad. I'd wake up sweating, sometimes screaming. Once I grabbed her arm so hard it left bruises. I apologized for days. She said she understood, but something changed after that. She started recording our conversations. For her work, she claimed. Building awareness about PTSD. I trusted her. What I didn't know then was that she was creating a detailed profile of my trauma. Every nightmare, every trigger, every flashback. She documented it all. Not to help me heal, but to craft a convincing narrative for later. She even staged photos when I was at my worst. Disheveled, exhausted, eyes vacant after a sleepless night. Photos that would never be shown while I was alive, but would become powerful evidence of my deteriorating mental state after my supposed death. Then came that night in April. I'll never forget it. Rain hammering on the roof. Thunder that sounded too much like artillery. I was already on edge when she burst into the house, soaking wet, eyes wild. "They're coming for you, David." Her voice was shaking. "We need to get you out of here." "Who?" I was already reaching for the gun I kept locked in the bedside drawer. Old habits. Remember Operation Shadowfall? My blood went cold. Classified joint operation with Afghan Special Forces. The mission that got my best friend killed. Not something I ever discussed with her. Not something I could discuss with her. "How do you know that name?" I asked. "It doesn't matter." She was throwing clothes into a duffel bag. "What matters is it's being declassified. There's a leak, and the survivors of the compound, they've put a bounty on everyone involved." I should have asked more questions. Should have called my commanding officer. Should have done 1,000 things differently. But when your wife is terrified and telling you terrorists are coming for you, and you've seen what those terrorists can do, you move first and think later. "We need to make them think you're dead," she said. "It's the only way they'll stop looking." The plan came together fast. Too fast, I realize now. She already had fake IDs ready, already had a cabin picked out in northern Montana, already had a story about how her war hero husband, haunted by his demons, had walked into the woods with his service pistol and never returned. We said goodbye at a truck stop off I-85. She hugged me, tears streaming down her face. "When will it be safe to come back?" I asked. "I don't know. Maybe never." She pressed a burner phone into my hand. I'll contact you when I can. Don't call me. Don't try to find me. As far as the world is concerned, David Harrington died tonight. I watched her drive away, feeling like I'd made a terrible mistake. But I trusted her. God help me, I trusted her. For 3 months, I lived like a ghost in that Montana cabin. No internet, no phone except the burner. Chopping wood, hunting, sleeping with one eye open. Jumping at shadows, waiting for a call that never came. The isolation was brutal, worse than any deployment. At least in Afghanistan, I had my team. Here, I had nothing but my thoughts and the crushing Montana silence. I'd hike 10 miles some days just to feel something besides the gnawing loneliness. The locals at the general store 5 miles away knew me only as Mike, the quiet guy who bought supplies once a month and never talked about himself. Perfect cover story, perfect prison. Winter came early that year. October brought 3 feet of snow and temperatures that made my old wounds ache. The cabin had a wood stove that barely kept the place above freezing. I'd wake up seeing my breath, thinking about Ava in our warm bed back home. Was she safe? Was she worried? Did she miss me as much as I missed her? One night, a blizzard knocked out the generator. The temperature dropped to 15 below. I wrapped myself in every blanket I had and still couldn't get warm. My leg, the one with the Kandahar bullet, seized up so bad I couldn't walk. I lay there in the dark, wondering if this was how I'd really die. Not from terrorists, not from PTSD, but from freezing to death in a cabin no one knew I was in. The perfect disappearing act. When the battery on the burner finally died, I hiked into town and bought another. Called the only number programmed into it. Disconnected. I broke my promise and searched for news about myself online at the town library. Found my obituary. Found pictures of my funeral. Ava in a black, supported by my mother. The folded flag. The 21-gun salute I never heard. And then I found the interviews. Ava Harrington, grieving widow, telling the world how her husband, a decorated Special Forces operator, had succumbed to the invisible wounds of war. How she was starting a foundation in my name. How she would fight to make sure no other wife lost her husband the way she lost me. She was on talk shows, at political rallies, testifying before Congress about veteran suicide. My death had made her a star. I tried to tell myself she was doing good work, that maybe there really had been a threat, and this was her way of keeping me safe while making something positive out of it. I nearly convinced myself. Then I spotted a familiar face in one of her foundation photos. Mike Brennan, my former unit commander, standing next to Ava at a fundraiser, looking very much like a man who didn't believe one of his operators was being hunted by terrorists. I called in some favors. Not easy when you're officially dead, but I still had friends who owed me. Asked them to check if there had been any chatter about Shadowfall, about bounties on American soldiers. Nothing. Not a whisper. The operation was still classified, not a word leaked. I'd been played. But why? I needed to understand before I made my move. So I watched. For 2 more years, I watched from a distance as the Ava Harrington Foundation for Veteran Mental Health became a multi-million-dollar organization. As my wife, still legally my wife, became the face of veteran advocacy in America. I changed my appearance, grew a beard, darkened my hair, got a job as a security consultant under my new identity, moved to Chicago close enough to keep tabs on her. She'd relocated to D.C. by then, rubbing elbows with senators and cabinet members. Chicago was where I started to rebuild something resembling a life. I rented a small apartment in Logan Square, paying cash for my security work. I made exactly one friend, my neighbor, an elderly Vietnam vet named Carl, who recognized something in my eyes that most civilians miss. The 1,000-yard stare. He never asked questions about my past, and I never volunteered information. We'd just sit on the fire escape, drinking beer, talking about everything except the wars we'd fought. People who haven't been there don't get it, he told me once. They think the hard part is the fighting, but it's not. The hard part is coming home. He was right, and I hadn't even really come home. I was living in limbo, not David Harrington anymore, but not fully whoever I was pretending to be either. Just a ghost drifting between worlds. My job at the security firm kept me busy. Mostly corporate work, risk assessments, building security protocols, training private guards. The owner was ex-military and didn't ask too many questions about my spotty background check. All he cared about was that I knew what I was doing and kept my mouth shut. I was good at both, but my real work happened after hours, tracking Ava, learning her routines, watching the foundation grow. I set up alerts for every mention of her name, every press release from the foundation, every financial filing. A digital dragnet that caught everything. What I discovered wasn't just that she'd lied about the threat. She'd been planning her rise for years before she ever met me, before she started volunteering at Walter Reed. She'd written a thesis on the political capital of military sacrifice. She'd dated 3 other veterans before me, all with combat experience, all with PTSD. She was looking for the perfect story, and I gave it to her. Worse, the foundation was skimming. Millions meant for veteran programs were being redirected to political campaigns, to luxury retreats for the board of directors, to Ava's 6-figure salary and penthouse apartment. The evidence was all there if you knew where to look. Grant money allocated to treatment centers that didn't exist. Administrative expenses that happened to match the cost of her vacation to the Maldives. Consulting fees paid to shell companies owned by her college friends. The more I dug, the dirtier it got. I once followed her to a fundraising gala at the Ritz-Carlton, paid $200 for a bartending shift through a temp agency, stood behind the bar pouring champagne for people in designer clothes as they wrote checks for our heroes. Watched Ava work the room, her hand on the arm of a senator, laughing at his jokes. I served her a gin and tonic. She didn't even look at my face. Just took the drink and walked away, tipping nothing. I wondered if she'd recognize me if she really looked. If some part of her would know her husband, even through the beard and dyed hair. She didn't. I was invisible to her, just like all the veterans she claimed to champion. My rage was cold and patient, a sniper's rage. I would only get one shot at this. It started with flowers, white lilies, the same ones from our wedding, delivered to her office. No card, just flowers. Then again the next week, and the next. Next came the emails, from different accounts, each containing a single line that only she and I would understand. References to private jokes, to moments no one else witnessed. Remember the moonlight on Tybee Island? The scar on your left hip shaped like Florida. You still sleep with your right hand under the pillow? I watched her social media presence grow increasingly erratic, saw the dark circles under her eyes in press photos, noticed her hands shaking during interviews. She hired security, changed her email, changed her phone number. I sent a package to her apartment. Inside, nothing but a set of dog tags. Not mine, she had those presented to her at my funeral. These were blank, just a warning. I was getting closer. The security camera footage from her building showed her reaction when she opened that package. The blood draining from her face. The way she slammed the door and immediately got on the phone, pacing frantically. She knew. Maybe not that I was alive, but that someone knew her secrets. Someone was coming for her. Her next move surprised me. Instead of hunkering down, she went bigger. More interviews, more fundraisers, a book deal, a documentary about her life's work, as if she could outrun the truth by becoming too famous to touch. Classic Ava, when threatened, doubled down. The final piece fell into place when I learned she would be receiving the Medal of Freedom for her work with veterans. The ceremony would be televised. The president himself would be there. Perfect. I called in my last favor, a White House security staffer who'd served with me in Ranger School. Got myself added to the event security team. Waited until she was mid-speech, talking about her personal loss and how it drove her mission. Then I stepped out from behind the curtain. No longer in disguise. Just me. Staff Sergeant David Harrington in full dress uniform, every medal I'd earned displayed on my chest. Alive. The look on her face, I'll treasure that until the day I die. Real die, not the fake kind she orchestrated. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish. Her eyes rolled back. She crumpled to the ground before she could even scream. Chaos erupted. Secret Service swarmed the stage thinking she'd been shot. The broadcast cut off. I was tackled by 3 agents before I could say a word. Spent the night in a holding cell while they figured out who the hell I was and why a dead man was walking around the White House. My fingerprints told the truth. DNA confirmed it. I was officially resurrected by morning, and Ava was officially finished. The scandal exploded like nothing I'd ever seen. "Dead hero returns to expose fraud," read the headlines. Every news channel wanted my story. Every talk show wanted an exclusive. I refused them all. This wasn't about fame. It was about justice. The foundation's finances were torn apart by investigators. Board members scattered like cockroaches when the lights came on. Ava went from national hero to national disgrace overnight. The money trail led to offshore accounts, to political action committees, to luxury purchases disguised as operational expenses. I testified once, behind closed doors, to a congressional committee, told them everything. How she convinced me terrorists were hunting me. How she planned and executed my disappearance. How she built her empire on a lie, on my lie. Ava tried to spin it, claimed she truly believed I was in danger, claimed she'd been trying to protect me, claimed the foundation's work justified the means. Nobody bought it, especially not after they found her thesis. Not after they found the journal where she'd written, "David is perfect, decorated enough to be impressive, damaged enough to be believable when he breaks." She never expected me to be strong enough to come back. That was her mistake. The day after I testified, I received a text from an unknown number. "I loved you. That part was real." I didn't respond. Some lies don't deserve acknowledgement. 3 months later, Ava Harrington pled guilty to fraud, misappropriation of charitable funds, and filing a false death certificate. 5 years in federal prison. No parole. Poetic justice. As for me, I'm rebuilding. My mother cried for 3 days when I showed up at her door. My unit brothers welcomed me back with a mixture of disbelief and respect. The Army officially changed my status from deceased to honorably discharged. I got back pay, got my identity back, got my life back. I work at a small veterans center now. Real work, helping guys like me readjust. No cameras, no speeches, no politics. Just veterans helping veterans. The nightmares are still there, but they're different now. Sometimes I dream about the ambush in Kandahar. Sometimes about Ava's face when she saw me at the ceremony. Not sure which is worse. People ask if I hate her. I don't. Hate requires energy I'm not willing to give her anymore. What I feel is closer to pity. Imagine building your entire life on a lie, knowing that someday, somewhere, the truth might walk through the door. That's the thing about ghosts. Sometimes they come back. Last week, I received a letter from the prison where she's serving her sentence. I haven't opened it. Not sure I will. Some stories don't need an epilogue. But I'll tell you this. On the nights when the memories from Afghanistan get too loud, I think about that moment on the stage. The moment when our eyes met across the crowded room. The moment when she realized all her lies were about to come crashing down. And I sleep just fine. The White House ceremony was everything I'd imagined during those long nights planning my return from the dead. Crystal chandeliers hanging from ornate ceilings, red carpets so thick your shoes sink into it, Secret Service agents with earpieces and suspicious eyes scanning every corner, politicians in $1,000 suits pretending to care about veterans for the evening, and Ava, my wife, my betrayer, standing at the podium in a navy blue dress that probably cost more than my monthly salary at the security firm. Her hair was different now, shorter, more polished, the messy bun replaced by a sophisticated style that screamed Washington insider. 5 years of building her career on my fake grave had treated her well. I'd positioned myself behind a column near the stage, close enough to see her, but hidden from her line of sight. The security badge my old ranger buddy had arranged hung around my neck, letting me move freely through areas guests couldn't access. Ava Harrington's work has transformed how this nation thinks about its veterans, the president was saying. Her courage in the face of personal tragedy has inspired millions. Personal tragedy, that's what they were calling me now. My hands were steady as I adjusted my uniform jacket. 5 years ago, I couldn't hold a coffee cup without spilling it. The nightmares, the flashbacks, the constant hypervigilance, they'd nearly broken me. But nothing builds strength like betrayal. Nothing focuses the mind like revenge. The president continued. When she lost her husband, Staff Sergeant David Harrington, she could have retreated from the world. Instead, she turned her grief into purpose. Ava stepped forward to accept the medal, her practiced smile gleaming under the lights. I'd seen that smile 1,000 times on television over the years, on news programs, in congressional hearings, at fundraising galas where celebrities paid $10,000 a plate to hear her tell my story. My story, not hers, mine. "Thank you, Mr. President," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the sound system. "This honor belongs to every veteran who has struggled with the invisible wounds of war, and to my husband David, whose battle with PTSD showed me the true cost of service." My cue. I stepped out from behind the column and began walking slowly toward the stage, not rushing, not causing alarm, just a deliberate advance that parted the crowd like water. "David's struggle became my mission," she continued, unaware of my approach. "When he took his own life 5 years ago, I made a promise that his death would not be in vain." 20 feet away now, people were beginning to notice me, the dress uniform, the medals, the distinctive limp from the Kandahar bullet. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "Through the foundation that bears his name, we've helped thousands of veterans access the mental health resources they desperately need." 10 feet, a Secret Service agent was moving in my direction, hand drifting toward his weapon. I kept my own hands visible, non-threatening. I wasn't here for violence. We've changed legislation, we've changed lives, and we've changed how America sees its heroes. 5 feet. I stepped into the pool of light that illuminated the stage area, directly in her line of sight. Ava's words faltered, her eyes scanning the crowd as she spoke, locked onto mine. Recognition hit her like a physical blow. The color drained from her face so quickly I thought she might have been shot. She couldn't continue. Her knuckles went white against the podium. The room went silent, everyone confused by her sudden change. Everyone except me. I gave her the slightest nod. "Hello, wife." Her knees buckled. She went down hard, crumpling onto the stage floor with a thud that echoed through the microphone. The metal case clattered beside her. And then, chaos. Secret Service agents swarmed the stage, surrounding the president. Others rushed toward Ava. 2 more tackled me to the ground, my face pressed against the carpet, arms wrenched behind my back. "Hostile down," someone shouted. "I'm not hostile," I said calmly. "I'm her husband." "Sir, her husband is deceased," the agent growled in my ear, cuffs tightening around my wrists. "That's what she wants everyone to believe." They dragged me to a secure room somewhere in the bowels of the White House. Concrete walls, no windows, a metal table bolted to the floor. Classic interrogation setup. I'd conducted a few myself in Afghanistan. 3 hours of Kiddishin. Who was I? How had I gotten into the event? What were my intentions? Was I working with anyone else? I answered everything truthfully, showed them the scar from the bullet in Kandahar, recited my service number, gave them the names of my commanding officers. "If you're who you say you are," one agent finally said, "then why does the U.S. government think you're dead?" "Because my wife needed a good story to launch her career," I replied. "And a living husband with PTSD isn't nearly as compelling as a dead one who couldn't handle his demons." They took my fingerprints, drew blood for DNA, called in officials from the Pentagon, from Veterans Affairs, from the FBI. Each new person who entered the room did a double take when they saw me. The ghost of Staff Sergeant Harrington back from the dead. Around 3 a.m., the door opened again. A man in an army dress uniform entered. Colonel Michael Brennan, my former commander. The man I'd seen in photos with Ava. "Jesus Christ," he whispered when he saw me. "Harrington, it's really you." "Hello, sir," I said, standing at attention despite the handcuffs. Old habits. "At ease, soldier." He shook his head in disbelief. "We buried you. I gave the eulogy." "I heard it was nice. Sorry I missed it." He didn't laugh. "Where the hell have you been?" "Montana at first, then Chicago, working security under a different name." "Why?" The question carried 5 years of confusion. I told him everything. How Ava had convinced me terrorists were hunting the Shadowfall team. How she'd orchestrated my disappearance, my fake suicide. How I'd discovered the truth and spent years planning my return. His face darkened as I spoke. By the time I finished, he looked like he might put his fist through the wall. "She used the foundation money to buy herself a penthouse," I said, "to fund political campaigns for people who would advance her career. to pay herself $500,000 a year to tell sad stories about me on television. Brennan ran a hand over his face. I knew her, Harrington. Worked with her on veterans legislation. She seemed genuine. She's very good at what she does, sir. He looked me straight in the eyes. I'll make this right. By morning, my identity had been confirmed. The handcuffs came off. The questions changed from who are you, to what do you need? Turns out coming back from the dead creates a mountain of paperwork. Ava had been taken to a hospital after her collapse. When she regained consciousness, they told her I was alive, in custody, and talking. According to the agents who were present, she vomited and had to be sedated. Good. I expected to feel something more when it all came crashing down. Satisfaction, maybe. Vindication. But mostly I just felt tired. 5 years of living as someone else. 5 years of watching her build an empire on my grave. 5 years of plotting a revenge that lasted less than 5 minutes. Was it worth it? I think about that question a lot now. The media frenzy was immediate and overwhelming. Dead hero returns, screamed the headlines. Veterans advocate accused of elaborate fraud. Harrington Foundation under federal investigation. I declined all interviews. This wasn't about publicity for me. It was about truth, about consequences. The consequences came swiftly. The foundation's accounts were frozen. Donors demanded refunds. Board members resigned en masse, all claiming they had no knowledge of any impropriety. Politicians who had once smiled beside Ava in photos now couldn't remember her name. 3 days after the White House incident, I was sitting in another government office, this one at the Pentagon, when an aide handed me a note. She's asking to see you. I didn't need to ask who. They brought her to a conference room. She'd aged overnight. The polished Washington power broker was gone, replaced by a woman who looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her hands trembled as she sat across from me. 2 federal agents stood by the door, watching silently. David, she whispered, you're really alive. Disappointed? She flinched. How can you say that? I mourned you. I built a foundation in your name. You built a foundation on a lie, I corrected her. You told me terrorists were hunting me, made me abandon my life, my family, my identity, all so you could play the grieving widow on national television. It wasn't like that, her voice cracked. I was trying to help veterans. I was trying to make a difference. By stealing millions from your own foundation? By using my supposed suicide as a stepping stone to fame? I leaned forward. I saw the journal, Ava, your thesis. David is perfect, decorated enough to be impressive, damaged enough to be believable when he breaks. Were those your words? She looked away. It was complicated. It really wasn't. You saw an opportunity, a broken soldier with nightmares and a purple heart. The perfect story to launch your career. All you needed was for me to disappear. I loved you, she insisted, tears streaming down her face. Maybe, but you loved your ambition more. She reached across the table, trying to take my hand. I pulled back. What happens now, she asked. Now you face the consequences. Fraud, embezzlement, filing a false death certificate, whatever else they can throw at you. I stood up. And I rebuild the life you stole from me. David, please, her voice was desperate now. We can fix this. We can say it was a misunderstanding, that I really believed you were in danger, that you went into hiding on your own. I almost laughed, still trying to spin the story. It's over, Ava. The truth is out. They'll send me to prison. Probably. I walked to the door, then paused. You know what the worst part is? I would have helped you. If you'd wanted to start a foundation, advocate for veterans, make a difference, I would have stood beside you. But you needed a tragedy more than you needed a partner. As I left, she called after me. I saved you. You were drowning in those memories, in those nightmares. I gave you a fresh start. I didn't look back. There was nothing more to say. The investigation uncovered everything. The offshore accounts, the diverted donations, the fabricated programs that existed only on paper, the political contributions disguised as advocacy efforts, the luxury expenses written off as business necessities. Most damning of all were the records they found in a storage unit rented under her maiden name. meticulous plans dating back 2 years before my death. Notes from meetings with a private investigator she'd hired to dig into my military service, specifically looking for classified operations she could leverage. Contact information for a doctor who specializes in identifying unclaimed bodies. Receipts for the purchase of the Montana cabin, paid in cash months before she ever mentioned any threat to me. This wasn't opportunistic. This was calculated, cold, precise. She'd studied me like a target, identified my vulnerabilities, and exploited them with surgical precision. Ava Harrington, America's favorite veterans advocate, had stolen nearly $7 million meant to help the soldiers she claimed to champion. The irony wasn't lost on me. In trying to escape the memories of war, I'd married someone capable of inflicting a different kind of damage, someone who saw my trauma not as something to heal, but something to exploit. My mother's reaction when I showed up at her door in Florida is something I'll never forget. She'd aged a decade in the 5 years since my death. Her hair had gone completely gray. She'd moved to a smaller house, unable to bear the memories in the old one. When she opened the door and saw me standing there, she didn't scream, didn't faint, just reached out with trembling hands to touch my face as if making sure I was real. "David," she whispered. "My David? It's me, Mom." My voice broke. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." She pulled me into her arms with surprising strength for a woman in her 70s. We stood in her doorway for what felt like hours, both of us sobbing. All the anger, all the betrayal I felt toward Ava, none of it compared to the guilt of what I'd put my mother through. "They told me you were dead," she kept saying. "They gave me a flag. They showed me your body." That detail hit me like a punch to the gut. My body? Later, I learned the truth. Ava had identified another soldier's body as mine after a training accident. The damage had been severe enough that a visual identification was questionable, but who would doubt a grieving widow? Who would question her tears? DNA testing wasn't standard procedure for training accidents where the deceased's identity seemed clear. Just one more lie in a tapestry of deception. Reconnecting with my unit brothers was both easier and harder. Easier because they were overjoyed to see me alive. Harder because they'd moved on with their lives during those 5 years. Marriages, children, new careers. I'd missed so much. We gathered at O'Malley's, the bar near Fort Benning, where we'd celebrated after each deployment. 6 of them, plus me, the ghost at the feast. "To Harrington," said Martinez, raising his beer, too stubborn to stay dead. They all drank. I tried to smile, but it felt forced. Being back among them was surreal, like watching a movie where I should have had a role but had been edited out. "So what's the plan now?" asked Rodriguez. "You coming back to the unit?" I shook my head. Medically retired. The Army's making it official. Again. "Then what?" "Not sure yet." I took a swig of my beer. One step at a time. Wilson, always the quietest of the group, finally spoke up. "I saw her, your wife, at the ceremony where they gave your mom the flag. She seemed destroyed." "She's a good actress," I said flatly. "No, man. I believe you about all the fraud stuff. It's all over the news. But that day, that looked real to me. I didn't want to think about that possibility, that there might have been genuine grief mixed in with her performance. That would make it all too complicated, and I needed things to be simple. Black and white, her betrayal, my revenge. She had me declared dead so she could use my story to get rich and famous, I reminded him. Nothing real about that. The conversation moved on. War stories, remember whens, updates on guys who couldn't make it. I laughed in the right places, nodded at the right times, but felt disconnected from it all. 5 years as a ghost had changed me in ways I was only beginning to understand. As the night wound down, Rodriguez pulled me aside. "Hey, you need a place to stay? Got a spare room at my place." I shook my head. "Got a hotel. Government's picking up the tab while they sort out my back pay, benefits, all that." "All right, but the offer stands." He hesitated. "Look, Harrington, what she did, that's messed up. Beyond messed up. But don't let it define you, Basfano, okay? You're more than what happened to you." Words of wisdom from a guy who used to chug beer through a funnel. People change. I'd changed too, just in ways no one else could see. The trial was scheduled for 6 months later. I spent the intervening time rebuilding. New ID, new bank accounts, new apartment in Columbus, not far from Fort Benning. Physical therapy for the old injuries that had never properly healed. Therapy of a different kind for the wounds no one could see. My new therapist, Dr. Kimball, didn't pull punches. You have two separate traumas to process, she told me during our first session. What happened in Afghanistan and what your wife did to you. Neither is going to heal overnight. I'm not looking for overnight, and I said, just looking for better. She nodded. That's a good place to start. The Army retroactively classified me as medically retired rather than deceased. 5 years of back pay hit my account all at once. Enough to buy a small house outright, which I did. Nothing fancy, just a place that was mine, where I could paint the walls without asking permission, where I could get a Bossimo, a German shepherd named Max who'd failed out of police training for being too friendly. The investigators kept finding new evidence against Ava. New accounts, new deceptions. The case expanded beyond fraud to include identity theft, insurance fraud from the life insurance policy she'd collected on me, tax evasion, and a dozen other charges. Through it all, she maintained a partial defense. Yes, she'd mismanaged foundation funds. Yes, she'd spent donor money on personal expenses. But no, she hadn't forced me to disappear. That had been my choice, my PTSD, my paranoia. She'd simply taken advantage of a situation I'd created. It might have worked if they hadn't found her journal. If they hadn't traced the fake IDs she'd procured weeks before telling me about the non-existent threat. If they hadn't found the lease on the Montana cabin, signed in her maiden name 2 months before my death. The prosecution offered her a deal. Plead guilty to reduced charges, return the stolen funds, serve 5 years with possibility of parole after 3, or go to trial and risk 20. She took the deal. I attended the sentencing hearing, sat in the back row of the courtroom, watching as she stood before the judge in a modest gray suit, all the Washington polish stripped away. She didn't look at me, though she must have known I was there. Your Honor, she said when given the chance to speak, I came from nothing, a trailer park in southern Georgia. No money for college, no connections, no way out. When I met David, I saw an opportunity to do good in the world, to help veterans like him. It started with good intentions. The judge, a Vietnam veteran himself, was unmoved. Ms. Harrington, good intentions don't justify fraud on this scale. You exploited the very people you claimed to champion. You exploited your own husband's service and trauma, and you did it for personal gain. Not just for gain, she insisted. I did help veterans. The foundation funded programs, provided counseling, changed policies. While you lived in a penthouse and traveled by private jet, the judge cut in, paid for with donations meant for soldiers suffering from PTSD. She had no response to that. 5 years, the judge pronounced, no possibility of parole for 3. All stolen funds to be repaid. And Ms. Harrington, let me be clear. You are prohibited from any involvement with veterans organizations or charities upon your release. You've done quite enough helping already. As they led her away, she finally looked in my direction. Our eyes met for the second time since my return. No fainting this time. Just a long look that contained too many emotions to name. Regret? Defiance? Something else entirely? I couldn't tell. And then she was gone, through the side door, on her way to federal prison. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed. I pulled my cap lower and pushed through the crowd without comment. This chapter was closed. Time to write a new one. That new chapter began at a small veterans center in Columbus. Not running it, I wasn't ready for that kind of responsibility. Just helping out, talking to guys fresh from deployment, guys struggling with the same demons I'd fought, guys who needed to hear from someone who understood. The nightmares don't go away, I told a young Marine who couldn't sleep without his weapon. But you learn to live alongside them. You learn which ones are memories and which ones are just fears dressed up as memories. How? He asked, desperation in his eyes. One day at a time, one breath at a time. I handed him a card with Dr. Kimball's information. And you get help, real help, not the kind that comes in a bottle. Slowly I rebuilt myself. Not the old David, he was gone for good. But someone new, someone who understood both the cost of war and the cost of betrayal, someone who could use that understanding to help others. 6 months after the sentencing, I received a letter from the Federal Correctional Institution in Danbury, Connecticut. Ava's handwriting on the envelope. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. 2 pages, front and back. Explanations, justifications, apologies that all began with "but." Pleas for forgiveness mixed with subtle blame. Classic Ava, spinning the story even now. I read it once, then fed it into the shredder. Some doors are better left closed. The public's fascination with my story eventually faded, as it always does. A new scandal took its place in the headlines. Life moved on. My name became a footnote, a trivia question. Remember that soldier whose wife faked his death? But I was okay with that. Anonymity suited me better than notoriety. What surprised me most in the aftermath wasn't the betrayal or the fraud. It was how many lives Ava had actually touched, despite her motives. Veterans would approach me, awkwardly, to tell me how her foundation had helped them, how a grant had paid for therapy they couldn't otherwise afford, how a housing program had gotten them off the streets. Her methods were corrupt, but some good had come from them nonetheless. The world rarely gives us clean narratives. People ask me sometimes if I hate her, the reporters who still call occasionally, the guys at the center who know my story, even Dr. Kimball in our sessions. The truth is, I don't. Hate is too simple an emotion for what I feel toward Ava Harrington. Too clean. What I feel is a complicated tangle of betrayal, sadness, anger, and, strangest of all, gratitude. Because without her lies, I might never have faced my own. Might never have learned how strong I really am. Might never have found my way to helping other veterans not as a symbol or a story, but as a living, breathing example of survival. The nightmares still come. Afghanistan, the ambush, the bullet that tore through my leg. But now there are new ones, standing at my own funeral, watching Ava tell my story on television. The moment on the stage when our eyes met and her carefully constructed world collapsed. I wake from these dreams not in terror, but in something like peace. Reminders that I'm alive, that I came back, that some ghosts refuse to stay buried. And on the nights when sleep won't come, I take Max for long walks under the Georgia stars. We go to the park near my house, where there's a memorial to fallen soldiers. My name was there once, engraved in granite alongside others who never came home. They removed it after my return, patched the stone as best they could. But if you look closely, you can still see the outline. A shadow of letters that once spelled David Michael Harrington, Staff Sergeant, United States Army. A ghost of a name. A reminder of the man I was, the death I didn't die, and the life I'm still learning to live. Max nudges my hand with his nose when I stand too long at the memorial. Time to go home, he seems to say. Time to move forward. He's right. The past has taken enough from me already. I won't give it my future too. So we walk home under the stars, a man and his dog, a soldier who came back from the dead, a ghost who refused to stay gone. And somewhere in a prison cell in Connecticut, a woman who built her life on lies sleeps with the knowledge that sometimes the truth returns in ways you never expect. Sometimes the dead come back to haunt you, but that's her nightmare now, not mine.